Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1, action.
Assume nothing.
Brash, bald-faced blasphemy.
Question everything.
I find it extremely hard to imagine.
Open your eyes.
It is quite all right to be an atheist.
The fastest growing group of people in the country has been measured as being those who have no belief or who are atheists.
You don't have to be apologetic or quiet about it.
Challenge the opposition.
You see religion on 100 fronts losing the argument.
And start thinking. This is The Thinking Atheist Worldwide.
Here's an article that was released well before the election in June of this year by the Pew Research Center, titled Partisanship and Political Animosity in 2016. It was speaking about the process and the candidates as the campaigns were underway. But it draws a big circle around what we're talking about tonight. It said this: the 2016 campaign is unfolding against a backdrop of intense partisan division and animosity. Partisans' views of the opposing party are now more negative than at any point in nearly a quarter of a century. For the first time in surveys dating to 1992, majorities in both parties expressed not just unfavorable, but very unfavorable views of the other party. And today, sizable shares of both Democrats and Republicans say the other party stirs feelings of not just frustration, but fear and anger. More than half of Democrats, 55%, say the Republican Party makes them afraid, while 49% of Republicans say the same about the Democratic Party. Among those highly engaged in politics, those who say they vote regularly and either volunteer for or donate to campaigns, fully 70% of Democrats and 62% of Republicans say they are afraid of the other party. Are you one of those people? Are you afraid of the future with the other party having its fingers on the marionette strings? Do you worry about what's going to happen tomorrow? I mean, I'll admit some of that. I'll admit to a lot of that. I used to be a dyed-in-the-wool, true blue Fox News loving Christian. You know, my granddaddy was conservative, Republican. My daddy was conservative, Republican. And damn it, I'm conservative, Republican too. You know, love it or leave it, people. America. I was that guy. And of course, once I emerged from fundamentalist religion, I began to sort of look around at the world and I started to reevaluate my positions on a great many things. And more in my own life, I saw that the Republican Party was not representing my values. It was not the party that I aligned with in terms of human rights and ethics and science. And so I switched from Republican to Democrat, and now I'm what my father might sort of sneeringly call one of them secular progressives kind of thing, one of those liberals out there trying to tear down America. We look at each other and so often speak about each other in terms of caricature. And this is true with liberals when it comes to many conservatives as well. And we're going to get into a little bit more of that. I'm not rushing to the defense of people who are voting anti-science, who are voting anti-reason, who are voting anti-human rights. I'm not saying that I'm excusing their behavior. I'm saying I'm sick and tired of watching people speak about the other party in bumper stickers. It's maddening. It's intellectually dishonest. All Republicans are this. Sorry, you lost me at all. You lost me. These are nuanced issues and often, not always, often nuanced people who came to their positions from a host of complex ways, and we have to properly understand those things, those methods, those cultures, those atmospheres, those teachings, whether it's indoctrination or whether they came to a belief in some other way. Understanding is part of how we change the culture. Understanding is part of how good ideas defeat bad ideas. If you can't empathize with the people you disagree with, or you can't properly understand how they got there, how do you fight it? Before and after the election, I'm surrounded by these memes and one-liners and snarky headlines that Well, they speak about complex issues only in terms of caricature, only with broad overstatement, these inflammatory clickbait headlines that aren't really telling the story of how we got to where we are today. We're going to talk about much of that in this broadcast. How did we get where we are today? To be one nation, not indivisible, but absolutely divisible and divided and ripped in half and splintered and pulling itself apart at the seams. How did we get here? And as people who support secular values, as rationalists, as pro-science, as atheists, how do we move forward? What happens next? That's what this broadcast is about. I've got a bunch of terrific guests lined up, sort of peppering the show here and there with different groups and guests and interviewees, including representatives from American Atheists, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the Secular Coalition for America, among others, and of course your input with your calls and emails. So that's what tonight is about. Real fast, let me sort of tease what we're doing next week, okay? Next week, we're going to do something much lighter. We're going to jump out of politics. We're going to jump out of all of this insanity, and we're going to have some fun on Christmas. We are going to do Christmas music with secular artists. Actually, it's more than just Christmas music. We're going to do some random sort of musical selections. Some just speak to secular themes, but we're also going to have some Christmas music. I've got a couple members of the Fab Four, the Beatles tribute band, going to join us. Shelley Siegel's going to do a couple of tunes. I've got some various local artists who are part of the Thinking Atheist online community who submitted some stuff, very cool stuff for Christmas. So we're just going to enjoy some great music and hang out together next Tuesday. Some people are incredulous that an atheist could enjoy Christmas, especially Christmas music. What's the matter with you, Seth? It has Christ in the title, you hypocrite. How in the world could you enjoy Christmas? I just skipped the whole holiday. Well, look, if you want to skip the holiday, great. Knock yourself out. You've got every right to do so. You decide what holidays you want to participate in. But Christmas isn't really a Christian holiday. I know they want you to think that. Christmas actually has roots in a lot of different mythologies, and Christmas is essentially what we make it. I did a 15-minute video on this called Christmas Behind the Curtain. You can find it on YouTube. I have a Facebook version that has almost 200,000 views already, and it's rising. And essentially, it's me on camera going, hello, right? It's Christmas, and it's a lot of fun for a lot of atheists, and everybody needs to just get over it. And we get into the different pagan origins of many Christmas traditions. We get into the Gospels and the story of Jesus and all this stuff. And so anyway, that's coming up next Tuesday. And then the Tuesday after that, we're going to talk about the phenomenon of having to be an atheist going into a Christmas holiday, Christmas weekend, Christmas dinner, traveling to grandma's house, whatever, if you are an atheist and your family's fundamentalist. And they know you're an atheist and it gets weird. How do you handle family, religious family around the holidays? And if you have a perspective, the email address is podcast@thethinkingatheist.com. So those are going to be a couple of very interesting shows in the weeks ahead. Plus our end of year in review show will cap off the month of December. And before we get underway with tonight's broadcast, daring to delve into the sensitive issue of politics here in the USA, you know, it is the season where so many are talking about the baby Jesus. Where did the baby Jesus story come from? Who wrote the Gospels, which present the baby Jesus story, or the nativity story, or the life of Christ story? How historical is the chronicle of Christ? How valid is the religion surrounding Christ? These are just a few things covered by Professor Bart Ehrman in a lecture series called The Historical Jesus, which is available among thousands of other courses at the Great Courses Plus. I've been fascinated by a lecture where Ehrman talks about the other Gospels, like the Gospel of Thomas, you know, these books and fragments of books not found in the current biblical canon, the one that you and I know. Extra Gospels, who knew? The Great Courses Plus features award-winning professors teaching on a huge variety of subjects, from religion to science to psychology to literature to health and nutrition to hobbies like photography. You can learn how to play chess at the Great Courses Plus. And when you use the website I'm about to give you, you can check them out for an entire month for free. The whole library of over 8,000 courses, free for 30 days, streaming right to your computer, your TV, your tablet, laptop, smartphone, daily increasing your knowledge about the subjects that matter to you. Discover the Great Courses Plus with your free first month right now at thegreatcoursesplus.com/Seth. That's thegreatcoursesplus.com/Seth. Let's start the broadcast with a conversation about the secular voter. And we will begin with sort of a panel. I have three guests from the Secular Coalition for America. I've got Herb Silverman, the president of SCA, Larry Decker, the executive director, and Sarah Levin, the senior legislative representative for the Secular Coalition for America. And all three join me right here. It's great to have you.
Thank you for having us,
Good to be here. Thank you.
Good to be here.
Herb, I'll start with you. Thoughts on the recent election? Just let me have it. What do you think?
Well, I often look for turning lemons into lemonade, and unfortunately, there were a lot of lemons. But to me, one of the positive things, and I might have to stretch a little bit, is the two biggest vote getters during this presidential campaign, Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, are probably both atheists. Like when Sanders was asked whether he believes in God, he replied, "What my spirituality is about is that we're all in this together, and it's not a good thing to believe that as human beings, we can turn our backs on the sufferings of other people." I agree, but what does that have to do with a belief in God? And as far as Donald Trump, I can't picture him believing in a power higher than himself.
I had this conversation with somebody else. Do you think he believes in God? I'm like, yeah, I think he believes in God, and God's name is Donald Trump.
Right.
It's rare to see someone who is in love with himself as this man is. It's amazing.
And he makes a point of being politically incorrect, except that's the one way he is politically correct, saying that he's a good Christian. And the Secular Coalition has learned privately that at least 24 congressional members don't believe in God, but they're unwilling to come out of the atheist closets. And only when they do, and more atheists run and win public office, will this final political atheist taboo be broken. And that's one of the goals of our Secular Coalition for America.
I'm going to come back to the rise of the nones, the non-religious, this supposedly powerful voting bloc in the United States. Sarah or Larry, you want to speak to that? It was sort of weird watching the evangelicals rally up behind a non-evangelical candidate this year.
There's no arguing that the evangelicals really were a significant part of why Donald Trump won. But at the end of the day, the religious rights agenda is built on a demographic card castle. The model they won on can't last forever, and that's just because the demographics are shifting in the favor of religiously unaffiliated and young people. Trump lost among the largest religious demographic, the non-religious, and the largest age demographics, millennials ages 18 to 24. Only 35% of millennials supported Trump, and only 26% of the non-religious supported Trump. Unfortunately, both of these groups have low turnout rates, and the evangelical voting bloc does beat out the religiously unaffiliated in terms of voter turnout about 2-1. And so it's important to keep in mind that we're winning the battle of ideas, and we have examples of that from this election. You know, a few state ballot initiatives we did win on death with dignity. We won defeating in Oklahoma a ballot initiative that would have allowed the Ten Commandments monument to be restored to government property. So we're winning the battle of ideas. We just have a turnout problem, and that's a challenge, but that's also a hurdle that we can overcome.
Larry Decker, you want to weigh in?
You know, I think that the question you asked, you know, essentially it was strange to see the evangelicals swarm around a candidate like Donald Trump, and I couldn't agree more, except that despite perhaps some of the reasons that we all might think that the evangelicals wouldn't have supported Donald Trump in the way that they did, he was really right there on every single one of their big issues. He adopted the religious rights platform. And the religious right doubled down to get this guy elected. I mean, everything from repealing the Johnson Amendment to making sure that we have anti-choice and anti-equality justices appointed to the Supreme Court, to signing the First Amendment Defense Act, which has nothing to do with defending the First Amendment, and religious restoration privilege acts, you know, throughout the country. And we've seen it in, you know, the person that he's appointing to serve as the next Secretary of Education in terms of taking public education dollars and turning them into private education vouchers. So, he really hit every single one of their issues. And ultimately, it should be not a surprise to anyone that the religious right doubled down on this candidate, and he was successful. So, the election in and of itself, not just winning the White House, the Republicans winning the White House, but having control of the United States Senate and the United States House of Representatives, we've got our work cut out for us, without a doubt.
Herb had mentioned sort of trying to find the silver lining, or I'm not putting words in your mouth when you're talking about making lemonade, right? But Oklahoma, a hugely religious red state, had State Question 790 on the ballot, which was essentially wanting to use government dollars to promote religious symbols. They had just gone through another 10 Commandments battle on the Capitol grounds, and there was a big performance of all these Oklahoma cowboys, these Jesus-loving cowboys on horseback carrying a big monument of the 10 Commandments to deliver to Governor Fallon on the courthouse steps, at the Capitol steps, rather. And, she's out there kissing babies, and we all love Jesus. It's that kind of environment here. And yet, State Question 790 was defeated. And I found myself thinking, I'm encouraged that Oklahomans finally begin to see, at least in enough numbers to vote this down, the dangers of blurring the line between church and state. And you're saying we've seen more of these trends around the United States?
I was actually referencing those ballot initiatives, and I think that that's very significant to see that a ballot initiative like that was defeated in a state that actually carried Trump.
Oklahoma didn't really carry Trump. I think we put him in a cannon and shot him at high speed toward the White House. This state was hugely pro-Trump.
It was 65%. Trump won the vote by 65% in the state of Oklahoma, one of the higher margins of all of the states. And without a doubt, I think that we all look to Oklahoma as being one of those very positive things that happened during this election outcome in terms of the ballot initiative, and the fact that a majority of Oklahomans defeated that ballot initiative, which was terrific. I think to your point, Seth, you're absolutely right. And I think it's something that we have to raise, though. And a lot of pundits have been talking about this over the last couple of weeks since the election, and that's essentially that there wasn't a mandate. It wasn't a victory based on ideas. It was a victory based on this desire for change in our country. So, I don't think that President-elect Trump is coming into Washington, D.C. with a mandate. However, I do want to underscore the fact that I think a lot of conservatives, a lot of Tea Party House members, a lot of individuals that belong and are members of the religious right, I think that they all feel very empowered that they have a mandate. Here we're going to end up with a president who will have lost the popular vote by anywhere from 2% or around 2%, probably 2.5+ million votes, who's not coming into Washington, D.C. with a mandate, but his colleagues in Washington, D.C. in the House and Senate are certainly going to think that they have one.
Put another silver lining on this, or a Silverman lining, on the evangelical vote. They obviously know that Trump was not a good Christian like they felt they were, but they went on the issue like anti-abortion. And to me, this might say, even for evangelicals, that the religious beliefs of the candidates don't matter so much. It's more about the issues. And I think as atheists, this is what we should promote. Look at the issues we stand for, not just our professed religious beliefs in choosing a candidate.
I'm just going to piggyback on that because I think that Dr. Jones from the Public Religion Research Institute recently did a piece for Time where he pointed out that the evangelical voting bloc, which really tried to, for so many years, and I would say pretty successfully positioned itself as a values-based voting bloc, so, they were values voters, there has been a dramatic shift in the importance of personal character. And just to throw some numbers out there to show the difference, only 30% of white evangelical Protestants in 2011 agreed that the personal character of a candidate and reflecting their values is important. This year, 72% of white evangelicals say that they believe a candidate can build a moral wall between their private and public life. And so they've pretty much completely flipped on whether it's important or not for their candidate to represent their values. And I think that actually gives us, the religiously unaffiliated, an opening to position ourselves in our values, secular values.
We're also values voters. It's just that we have different values. Ours don't include what we think a deity wants us to do.
Well, wait, how much of this is sort of a values voter of convenience? I don't remember these evangelicals separating character from the actions in office when Bill Clinton and the Lewinsky scandal were hot and heavy, and they were talking about his morals and it's the decay of society. I mean, who he was, who he is, was hugely important. And now you're saying they're walking away from linking values and actions?
I think that was the reality before. I think that the difference now is that it's kind of been brought to bear for the American public to see that there is certainly not a consistency between evangelicals' positions on values and the candidates that they're voting for.
I would add one quick thing to that, if I could, Seth, and that is, essentially that I think that, and, I don't have direct evidence of this, except that I think we can all see it. I think it's pretty obvious. And it really reflects the hypocrisy of the religious right in this country, the evangelical community in this country writ large. And I'm not talking about all religious people by any stretch of the imagination, but I am talking about a specific segment of the religious community in this country. And that is that they won't question, or they're willing to overlook the moral character flaws, if you will, of the candidates that they'll support, that support their issues. But the candidate that they will not support, because that candidate doesn't support their issues, they will attack them left and right, and they will go at them like dogs on a hunt about their moral character. And I think that we saw that this year.
There's a split within evangelicals. Do we engage politically, or do we follow Jesus and render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and work on your own soul and those within your religious community? And some, I think, are more for separation of church and state rather than getting engaged politically on issues that are religious. If you're religious, as long as you're allowed to follow your religion without imposing it on others, we're fine with that. And that
right.
should be what the focus is. And I think for some younger evangelicals, that's becoming more true.
The Washington Post posted an article relating to some Pew research that talks about the religious composition of registered voters. The subheader of the article says the rise of the non-religious, and it lists down there white evangelicals, white mainline Protestant, black Protestants, other types of Protestants, Catholics, and whatnot. And look, right there at the top, registered voters, no religion, up from 14% in 2008 to 21% in 2016. In other words, they are representing a larger number, a more powerful voting bloc than Catholics, than Protestants. They are supposedly people of great influence, the nuns, the non-religious. Where do you think they are or were during the 2016 presidential election? Anyone?
I was concerned about the low secular voter turnout, and I think part of that might be because the candidates who would normally agree with our issues don't ever seem to give us a shout out. Like Hillary would talk about all faiths that we represent and we should have religious freedom, but an occasional shout out to include non-believers or atheists in the democratic fabric, I think would energize our base more, because we're a significant voting bloc, but they do not seem to go after us like they go after other religious minorities and groups that don't have as many people as we do.
Well, this speaks to what you'd mentioned earlier, though. You say we have many people representing us in Congress who are secular, who are non-religious, but they're not going to say it out loud, right? It's political suicide even at this stage?
That's part of my concern, that the secular coalition mission, in addition to being engaged in politics, is to increase the visibility of and respect for non-theistic viewpoints. And we want respected people in our culture, including politicians, to acknowledge that we're good and decent citizens and we deserve the same rights as religious people. A lot of people, even a Democrat at one point, like Joe Lieberman, would say things like we have freedom of religion, but not freedom from religion, which to me makes no sense.
Sarah Levin, you occasionally run into elected officials who might privately confide in you. I don't really buy into religion. It doesn't really impact my life. I'm a secular. I can't say it, but I get you. Do you ever run into those people who, under the surface, there's a whole other person we may not realize is there?
Yes, and I wanted to piggyback on what Herb was saying about how we're an important voting bloc, but we don't get the shout out. And I think I would agree that our voting bloc is really taken for granted. And it's easy to see, they look at the numbers and they know that the religiously unaffiliated favors them. And by that, I mean the Democratic Party. And we are at the Secular Coalition are trying to change that. When I was in Texas, in San Antonio in June, we had the first ever secular caucus at a major political convention. And I did have a local candidate come up to me and say, "Hey, I'm agnostic." I said, "Hey, that's great. You should come and speak at our caucus tomorrow." He said, "Oh, no, I can't do that. That could cost me my election." So that's very much still a problem. But the next day we had standing room only, hundreds of people onto our secular caucus. And then the following day, we had our secular policy proposals incorporated into the official Texas Democratic Party platform. And so what we need to do to change the way that our voting bloc is treated within the Democratic Party so that we're no longer taken for granted and we get those shout outs and the outreach that we deserve is to organize, to have secular caucuses in the states, to have a presence of secular activists within the political party across the political spectrum, not just secular Democrats, but there are secular Republicans and secular Libertarians and secular Greens. And this is where the action happens, is at these conventions at the local and state level. And so we're starting to work with secular people across the political spectrum to get them engaged so that they can educate their own party leadership at the local and state level about religiously unaffiliated voters and propose secular policies that our community cares about.
Now, I can hear the howls of protest already. Larry, I'll let you speak to this, right? Well, first of all, what the hell's a secular value? And the second thing is I'm no longer a sheep. Groupthink is what I escaped when I escaped the church, damn it. And politics is no better than religion, and I'm not going to join it. You find there's a group of people who believe that joining a cause or group or effort in this way of saying you might want to pursue something with people of like mind would be religious in some way. Do you find any of this pushback, and how would you address it, Larry?
Well, I mean, I think that, look, as Sarah had mentioned and Herb had mentioned, we have numbers growing on our side. What we have to do is clearly convince individuals within the secular community that this is important, that we can't afford to be spectators in the game of politics. We have to be active participants. So, yeah, I mean, of course, I think that there are a number of people who feel very disaffected by the political system and that don't want to engage in it. But it's really up to us to convince them that they have to be engaged and point out the reasons why it's important that they're engaged. I think Sarah's right, though, also, and we've done a great deal of work on this this year in particular, Sarah has, which is really reaching out across the political spectrums. Because, listen, our movement, the secular community, is extremely diverse politically. There are Republicans, there are Democrats, there are Libertarians, there are Green Party individuals, there are independents, overwhelming independents within our movement. And, we have to make sure that we're creating space in all of the political parties, because ultimately, what it boils down to is essentially that we are fighting for the separation of church and state, for the freedom of and the freedom from religion. Under the Constitution, and specifically the First Amendment, there ought to be room in every political party in this country for secular Americans.
We are a secular country where secular values are American values. There's no religious test. And as far as our politicians, we have very few that show profiles in courage. For some, their religion is getting reelected. And once we show that we're organized, we vote, and we care about issues, and we would like to be acknowledged, I think that'll help our culture change. I think it'll eventually change in the long run with younger people looking at the internet, getting different secular values. But we're trying, as the Secular Coalition, to help bring about that change more rapidly.
Well, that's a term that keeps coming up. Let's talk about it real fast before I lose you guys. Secular values. Somebody flesh it out for me. What are secular values? How do you frame that? How do you define it?
We have 4 secular values that we have defined in relation to all of the issues that our community cares about. The first is freedom, and the way that we define freedom is very different than our opponents on the religious right define freedom. For us, freedom means protecting beliefs but never imposing them. Equality means equal rights and also equal responsibilities, and that plays into things like how government money is spent. If you're a nonprofit, you're religiously affiliated, and you get government money, you have the responsibility to the taxpayers and to the people you serve not to discriminate and to abide by non-discrimination laws, just like every other nonprofit has to. And so we define equality in terms of rights, but also responsibilities to the American people and the rule of law. And then we have inclusion, meaning all faiths and no faith is included, whether it's our national symbols, our national motto, whether it's in the military, making sure that there's no religious displays on government property. And if you're going to have religious displays, you got to have them all or you got to have none. And then we have knowledge. And knowledge we define as information empowering people. And that cross-cuts from making sure that women who are seeking abortion care are not being told by someone in a lab coat who is not a doctor that abortion causes cancer. So we've been concerned about the issue of crisis pregnancy centers. And of course, we're concerned about the information provided to students in public schools, taxpayer-funded schools, whether that's comprehensive sex education or science education, where climate change is included in the curriculum, where evolution is taught and is not taught in tandem with creationism. And so all of our 4 values and the way that we define them are tied to all of the issues that our community stands for.
Larry, is it true that you have some religious leaders, churches, religious institutions who stand alongside you to protect the church-state line, to promote secular values?
Oh, absolutely. We partner, and I'm glad you asked that question. We partner with a wide variety of individuals. As you may know, the Secular Coalition for America represents 19 member organizations, and those are national organizations that are non-theist in nature, that represent atheist, agnostic, humanists, and otherwise non-theist Americans. But we also have alliance organizations that we work with. And, some of them are religious in nature. One that we've worked closely with this year is Catholics for Choice. And, it's clear that in some areas, the Catholics in the non-religious community oftentimes might not be able to work together. But this particular group certainly represents interests that we believe in, and there are areas where we can align. But, Seth, going into the start of the 115th Congress that will be seated on January 3rd, and the inauguration of President-elect Trump and Vice President-elect Pence, we really have to continue to work tirelessly to partner with other non-affiliated and perhaps religious organizations to expand our tent on areas where we can align. And I think that we will be looking at, and we do look at issues just as Sarah just defined, when we're talking about secular values: freedom, inclusion, equality, and knowledge. So I think that there are areas, because I think there's going to be some cause for concern by a number of religious organizations, where we can create the Washington, D.C. strange bedfellow effect, where, two otherwise never looking each other in the eye, never courting one another, never working with one another, groups would come together and align on specific issues. So I'm looking forward to creating more partnerships this year, helping to expand our tent and get our message out there. But absolutely, we do work with the faith community, and we'll continue to do that.
Herb Silverman, any final thoughts, and how can people support the SCA?
Well, in terms of the religious freedom, if I were to give a bumper sticker, it would be, it means you can promote your religion, but you can't impose your beliefs on those who don't share them. And also, I don't think religion should be privileged over conscience. For instance, religious pharmacists are expected to fill prescriptions, just as vegetarian supermarket cashiers are expected to check out meat products. Now, in terms of how we can support the Secular Coalition for America, I would say first go to our website, secular.org, and see some of the good work we're doing and how you can support us through much needed contributions. We can't ask you to tithe like churches can, but we still appreciate your donations. And look at our action alerts that Congress members, when they see a lot of people in their community care about the issues, they're more likely to vote for the issues that are of concern to us. And we have a national organization in D.C., but we're in the process of working to form 50 state secular coalitions as well. And we'd like people to get involved in their states as well as with national organizations.
Herb Silverman, Sarah Levin, Larry Decker of the Secular Coalition for America, for your perspective and time. Thanks so much. Thanks for being a part of the broadcast. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Seth.
Thanks
Thanks for having us, Seth.
I realized, of course, when I scheduled this show about politics, that I was entering a minefield. I knew I'd immediately hear this cacophony of protest from all sides in the defense of other political parties or platforms. I mean, the Republicans are going to be pissed when we talk about Donald Trump in an unflattering way, and we will. I have no doubt I'm going to hear from a host of indignant libertarians after this broadcast. They're going to hear my more liberal perspectives and many of the liberal perspectives of our guest, and they're going to say, well, that's actually a libertarian thing. Well, it's true. I have a libertarian shade on some issues, and there's some overlap there. But for my own part, and this is just me, I don't find the Libertarian Party nearly proactive enough to be a good fit for me. It's too loose, it's too broad, too much latitude, it's too dismissive of the merits of state and federal government, state and federal programs, which I think are important and necessary and in many cases beneficial. I support government structure. I don't think any form of government automatically destroys my own individual liberty, which is often a libertarian talking point. And I expect fully the libertarians to then show up and explain why I'm wrong and defend their own platform and party, and fine. I had a message in from Justin. He said, I'm scared to listen to this show. You see, I'm not a liberal voter. I subscribe to the philosophy of voluntarism, peaceful anarchism. I don't write this as an invitation to debate, to accost you for your personal political leanings, or to bemoan the trend of atheists leaning toward liberal politics. I write this as a coming out. I'm different, marginalized, and misunderstood. For some background, I've been an atheist longer than a voluntarist. I knew I had no faith for as long as I knew what church was, and decided that I believed there are no deities by the time I was in high school in the late 90s. As I developed my political thoughts, I incorporated my humanist concerns for peace, civil rights, and secular morality to lean more and more libertarian. Down that road lies voluntarism, the belief that aggressive force against other people is always unjustified, and enforcement of government laws is typically aggressive force, omitting the rare cases of direct intervention to stop battery, fraud, robbery, murder, etc. Further, the funding of even the best aspects of government action is by aggressive means, through taxes. So do I agree that the religious should not be able to push their quackery on school children? That bigots shouldn't discriminate against homosexuals? That churches shouldn't receive special tax favors? That real scientific research should be well funded? That the Ten Commandments and creches should not be displayed on government property? That people who want to marry or cohabit in a non-Abrahamically approved relationship shouldn't be prevented from doing so? Of course. And I'm sure the list of agreement could go on and on. I agree with the goals of the typical atheist humanist for a more rational, peaceful world, but the means they choose to get to those goals are immoral, and they are the same means that the religious have used for millennia to oppress the non-religious. In the end, I find your podcast to be one of the most fair and rational among the atheist podcasts I've found. I just wanted to make sure you knew there are some of us atheists that don't think liberal politics or politics of state action generally are the best means for liberating atheists from religious-based oppression. Justin, thanks for the message. I floated this topic of one nation divisible on Facebook a few days ago, and the opinions rushed in. Adam said this, like I tell everyone, if you're pissed off about the election, run for office. Be the change you want. You can't build a party from the top down. Run for school board, city council, state-level office. Run for office, especially if you're a minority, atheist, Muslim, and gay. Too many local positions are running unopposed. Clint said, in the right corner, we've got Team Reaganomics, who bought into a cardboard America with a big number 1 painted on it. If it's not America, it's probably full of terrorists. In the left corner, we've got a handful of adult children crying about a misogynistic monster in the closet and the microaggression under the bed. Russell said, this is all nothing new. When in our history hasn't there been division? Phil said, the political lesson for progressives, you still need to manage people and how they behave and react in the real world. Insults, condescension, and making them feel left out makes your theoretical plans fail hard. You want to persuade and influence people, you want to undo indoctrination and the effects of propaganda. Newsflash, arguing with facts and data is far, far, far from the holistic solution. Don't like Trump? Guess what? He understands human behavior and the powers of influence and persuasion. For anyone involved in a movement, atheists pay attention to how millions of people can be influenced and persuaded. Or, insult them, because that works great. Sarcasm. Peace. Dave said, America, the greatest country in the world, just not the smartest. I guess we should take a second and talk about the elephant in the room, which is the fact that there are some atheist Republicans, atheist conservatives, atheists who voted for Trump and think he was the best choice. Whether it was the lesser of two evils choice or whether they truly are inspired by and admire Trump as a candidate, those people are out there. I haven't met very many of them in my circles, but we know that they're out there. Robert M. Price being an example of someone who voted for Trump and took a very public stand, and he's taken some very public heat for it. I had a message in from Mario who said, as a community, are we atheists acting like free thinkers? Or more like the religious believers we criticize? Has politics become little more than a religious war? I'm a former Christian turned atheist. After leaving the church, I joined up with a local freethinker group. I enjoyed being around folks who had respect for logic, reason, evidence, and science. We as an atheist community have done well to apply rigor and reason to dismantle the often fallacious polemics of Christian apologetics. I am somewhat dismayed to discover that we've not done so well to apply the same level of critical thinking to our political etiology. As a group, atheists do seem to lean progressively left, but I don't hear good reason and good arguments to support this position. Instead, I hear emotionally laden streams of vindictives, such as sexist, racist, homophobic, and bigot. These are not arguments. After the election, I began to hear apocalyptic rhetoric I would expect to hear from religious zealots. This is the kind of behavior and loose thinking I thought I left when I left religion. We criticize the religious for holding to beliefs without reason and evidence, but I don't hear atheists making a good case for their progressive, liberal political beliefs. Do we actually know the long-term effect of immigration on our society? Do we understand the difference between immigration today and immigration during the earlier parts of our nation's history? Are more and more government programs really the best solutions to our nation's problems? Do we understand the effect of runaway spending, deficit, and fiat currency on the health of a nation? Is it reasonable to force morality through government legislation? Do we have the data, the evidence, and the reason to support our conclusions on social and political issues? Are we as atheists able and willing to apply the same standards of critical thinking to ourselves as we demand of the religious? Well, Mario, I often hear this when someone's in a point of disagreement against someone else, be it politics or otherwise. Quite often they'll say, I'm sorry you're so religious about this. I mean, it's true that human beings, left and right, conservative and liberal, Democrat and Republican, believer and non-believer, can have irrational points of view or can be guilty of being susceptible to bad ideas and resistant to better ideas. We're not immune from sort of the tribalism of party lines, the in-group and the out-group, the us and the other. But I'm one of those liberal progressives you're speaking about. And I don't think my support for many at least socially progressive liberal ideas, is religious thinking. I think you bring up some great points. Many people should, if they don't, should be taking these issues case by case. You're absolutely right to be skeptical of government waste and to ask the question, is a government program actually better than a private program in this specific instance, whatever it is? That's a legitimate question. Can government do it better? Yes or no? Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is no. I think it's just fine to resist this idea by many that any successful corporation is automatically a greedy meat grinder that chews up the common people. I don't think that's always the case either. I want to see people pursue a dream and take the risks and be prosperous and be successful to achieve the dream. And I don't think they should be vilified for prosperity. I think you and I might agree with that. But it's not the Republican Party that lines up with me on things like the death penalty. I come from a Republican Party in my past that was all about Old Testament justice. An eye for an eye. You kill somebody, we'll kill you back. Well, I've looked at the death penalty and how it's applied, and I've reversed my position. I'm no longer a supporter of it. That is a liberal value. I don't do drugs in my own life, but I'll tell you, I think it's stupid here in the 21st century for people to be in prison for weed. I'd like to see those resources allocated toward child molesters and murderers and genuine threats to society. I think you take the crime out of it, tax it if you want to, and use those resources elsewhere. That's not going to be on the Republican ticket. I support marriage equality. My best friend is gay. I just told his story in a speech I released called The Mystery Letter. My brother-in-law is gay. And I support their right to legally marry, to have marriage equality, and to enjoy the benefits of marriage that Natalie and I enjoy. Well, that's not on the conservative platform. It's not on the Republican platform. To find a platform or party that most lines up with me on that, I'm going to have to go Democrat. I'm not saying the Democrats are perfect. I'm not saying I always agree with them. I'm not saying they're corruption-free. But when it comes to that particular value, the Democrats, the liberals, the progressives line up with me more there. Obamacare has some serious problems. I think many people fell in love with the idea of a nationalized system, but it was run through so incredibly quickly, and there were so many gears in that machine, I'm not sure we can really understand exactly what's going to happen with it or to it in the years to come. Will it collapse under its own weight? Will it be revised and become something amazing? I do support the idea of a nation taking care of those with pre-existing conditions, not excluding people who might be under a certain income bracket from healthcare options. I think healthcare is a right, not a privilege. I don't think the health of someone who has money is more important than the health of someone who does not. And so I'm all about trying to pursue solutions that include everyone. Is Obamacare that solution? I don't know. But it's not the Republican Party that is pursuing options regarding health care that represent the poor, the disadvantaged, and those who have pre-existing conditions. It's just not. I'm not seeing it. I used to be a climate change skeptic. I saw the evidence and continue to see the evidence. Now I'm pretty convinced that we're seeing human-caused climate change, and I want a government, a political party, a platform that will address climate change. That's not the Republican Party. I support stem cell research. Is that something the conservatives are pushing? I support death with dignity, the right to die with dignity. I support that. That's not on the Republican platform. I'm a licensed firearms owner, but I support sensible gun legislation. I don't hear much in the way of sensible gun legislation from the Republican Party. Mostly from the hardline Republicans, I just hear fear. I used to be one of those people who used to worry about one day they're coming for our guns. It's all a matter of time, just a slippery slope. If you outlaw the automatics, before you know it, they're outlawing the semi-automatics, and after that, it's your pistols. Then your black powder rifles. Before you know it, we're all just going to have just nothing but butter knives to protect ourselves with. What happens when the United States government turns on its own people? Now, these are the same people that say that the U.S. government, the United States, is the greatest country on the planet. Love it or leave it. Hand over heart patriotism. And in the same breath, they're worried that the government's coming for them, right? They peer up over the barbed wire or from the gun show booth and say, one day we're going to have to defend ourselves against the very government they say is the greatest government in the world. It's just weird. There was a poster I saw online that showed every year of the Barack Obama presidency. And it's like, this year, he's coming for your guns. Next year, he's coming for your guns. The year after that, he's coming for your guns. In early 2016, it switched and they put Hillary Clinton's name in there. This year, Hillary Clinton's coming for your guns. Of course, we all know who profits from all this. Gun shows. And I know I've said this before, but I'll reiterate in case somebody missed it. But let's just say that the bleeding edge, state-of-the-art technology of the United States military was to turn on its own people. Let's just say that everybody in every branch of the armed forces, all the good men and women serving in our military, turned on their own fellow citizens. Let's just say it happened. What prayer do you think Buford T. Pusser has with his AR-15 and his shotgun on the gun rack and his conceal and carry permit, and he's got a 9mm in his pocket or whatever? What prayer do you think you have against the United States military? I mean, on every level, it makes no sense. Yet every time sensible gun legislation is brought up, looking at these weapons which are designed to kill and speaking about them in the 21st century, not in the context of the muskets of the Revolutionary War, but in the context of modern state-of-the-art weaponry. Anytime you have these discussions, there's a huge segment of the conservatives or Republican Party that just flip out and say they're coming for our... It's all about personal liberties. They're attacking our way of life. Really? Really? I don't buy that. I want a hard line between church and state, between government and private religious belief. That's not part of the Republican Party. We've got the Vice President of the United States who just released a video where he called himself a Christian first, a conservative second, and a Republican third. His Christianity for him is paramount. Don't tell me that doesn't affect how he governs or will govern when he takes office in January. I want fair taxation. I don't think we tax ourselves into prosperity, but I do think that the people at the top tiers have managed to skate because they have access to loopholes that you and I do not. I don't think it's fair, and I think they, as a matter of responsibility, should carry a larger, not an obscenely larger, not a conspicuously larger, but a larger tax burden. To whom much is given, much is also required. If you're going to enjoy the multi-million, perhaps multi-billion-dollar benefits of prospering in a free country, don't you have a larger responsibility to give something back? I agree with that. That's not on the Republican ticket. I completely support the idea of properly vetting the immigrants who enter this country for the safety of our residents and because it's simply good practice. What I don't support is this weird xenophobia that we seem to have, trampling upon our own Constitution, which forbids religious tests in terms of making policy or law. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Look, I'm a critic of Islam. Islam is a really damaging ideology, a damaging religion, and just a bad idea, a debunked idea. But I support personal religious liberty, personal religious freedom. And it makes me crazy when I watch most of the people around me who voted for Trump who can't tell the difference between a radical Islamist and a peace-loving, moderate Muslim. Someone who prays 5 times a day and, like most cultural Christians, has no idea what's in their Quran. They just want to live and be happy. Those people exist, and I, in some ways, am their advocate. I stand up for the personal right of an individual to have and hold a religious belief as protected under the Constitution. That's not being championed right now by the Republican Party, certainly not by Donald Trump. Now, Trump's talking about locking out all Muslims until he can figure out what the hell is going on. Well, I understand he's tapping into the fears about terrorism, about ISIS, but he's going about it in this hugely clumsy way, this sort of ham-fisted caricature of what the problem of Islam is or radicalism is, ignoring the fact that most people who are oppressed by the boot of radical Islam are Muslims themselves, desperate to find sanctuary somewhere. That's why they're desperate to get here inside the United States. I understand the problem of trying to vet the good from the bad, the moderate from the radical, the peace-loving from the warmongering. I understand that. I just simply disagree with the attitudes presented by Donald Trump when it comes to the problem. I think it's just not what we are. It's not who we are. The right of a woman to choose what happens with her own body, to make the decision about the fetus growing inside her. I don't want a government making that decision. I don't want a preacher or priest or religious ideology making that decision. And so to support the right of a woman to make the decision, do I go to the Republican Party? No, I don't. Their platform doesn't represent my values there. On a great many occasions, certainly not everyone, but on a great many occasions for me in my own life, when it comes to reflecting my own personal values, I've just found myself leaning more toward the liberals and the progressives and the Democrats. I mean, if you're looking for science-based, evidence-based, human rights-based decision-making, despite its many flaws, it's been, for me, the Democratic Party that's made the most sense. Doesn't make me religious. It doesn't excuse the tremendously clumsy and damaging overstatements that many liberals have been guilty of on social media in the wake of the election. I know the frustration you're talking about, when they post these photographs of the KKK and white supremacist rallies and they say, all Trump supporters are this. Well, it's just intellectually dishonest to do that. I understand your frustration. And it's more evidence that human beings are human beings and that liberals are not immune from hyperbole and overstatement and misstatement. Right now, there's somebody out there who's scrambling to find examples of people who are white supremacists who voted Trump. I'm not saying those people don't exist. I'm not saying there aren't a lot of those people out there. I'm saying it's intellectually dishonest to paint everyone who voted Trump with that brush. You just can't do it. You can't support it. You can't back it up. People came to a vote for Trump for a huge host of reasons. A huge host of reasons. You got to remember where I live. I'm surrounded by those who are defending a vote for Trump. They're all around me. They're in my family. They're many of my friends. They are my neighbors. I'm running back through the mental Rolodex as to why they voted for Trump. Many of them don't even really like Trump. They just hated Hillary. Some of them thought Obamacare was a bad idea, too broad, too convoluted, too bloated, too expensive. A great many of them voted because they were anti-abortion. And not because they are bigoted against women. That's not what motivates them. And this is a part of the abortion argument that I don't hear presented very often. They are religious. They are devout Christians. They believe life begins at conception. At the moment of conception, a soul is created. A baby is in the womb that cannot protect itself. Therefore, they voted for a candidate which might populate a Supreme Court that reverses Roe v. Wade to reverse legalized abortion, which they consider the murder of a human being. They are, in their own minds and hearts, voting to protect life because that is how they've been taught their entire lives. I mean, that's a more honest view of why they got where they got. I'm not saying it's the correct view. I'm not saying I believe in the soul. I'm saying understanding how they think helps us understand how to solve the problem and to counter bad ideas with better ideas. A lot of people are suspicious of big government programs, and I can understand it. I mean, despite the good that many government programs do, can you really honestly look at this bloated albatross, this runaway thing, this taxpayer-funded thing, and say that it is run efficiently and that it is managed efficiently and that it is corruption-free and it's always the best way to do it? I mean, look, I'm a secular progressive. I'm one of them heathen liberals, and I don't even buy that. Waste everywhere, and not a whole lot of motivation to change it. I understand the people angry and frustrated with big, quote-unquote, big government, and for some reason they think Trump's going to fix it. That's just crazy. But that's how they got there, right? Hillary, big government; Trump, private corporation. That's my candidate. That's how they got there. These are just a few of a great many instances of often single-issue voters who felt it was the right candidate and the right thing to do. And this shit often doesn't fit on a meme. It makes us feel good to paint the opposition as monsters. They're all this. They're all bigots. They're all racist. They're all sexist. They're all whatever. But I think we have to take a more nuanced, a more complex, a more intellectually honest view of the Trump phenomenon. And it's a whole lot more than posters of the KKK. Hell, my stepdaughter told me about a guy, friend of hers, 19-year-old gay man who comes from an evangelical family. He voted for Trump. Don't tell me he voted because he's bigoted against gay people. There's something else going on. Now, I understand the anger, I understand the fear, I understand the frustration. Some will disagree, but many of us look at Donald Trump and we don't see a genuine desire to lead and a love of country. We see someone who simply found a grander stage on which to be Donald Trump, a man who seems to love himself more than anyone and anything, anywhere. A man who has fabricated a huge part of his own legacy. I mean, when Tony Schwartz tells the New Yorker that he had ghostwritten Donald Trump's book, The Art of the Deal, and made most of that shit up, and by the way, beware, because Donald Trump is a sociopath, yeah, we have cause for concern when we see how he treats other people in his circle through the last several decades. Behavior we wouldn't tolerate in our own lives or with those we care about, but we tolerate it in Donald Trump? I don't think so. Do we look at a guy who has lived his entire life in this gold-gilded bubble of near dictatorial power and unbelievable privilege, the world of fame and flash and bling and opulence and over-the-top demonstrations of how much more he has than everybody else, and expect that he's going to go into the halls of government and represent the rest of us? That he speaks the language of compromise, which in so many ways is the language that is used to get things done? Not selling out, but compromising, listening, understanding, having perspective, knowing when to give, knowing when to take, knowing how to achieve productive compromise to get things done. Do I think he's going to walk into the governmental halls of power and understand how to get things done for the sake of the citizens and the country as a whole? Not remotely. Do I look at his outbursts on Twitter and elsewhere and see just how easily baited he is into these weird inflammatory outbursts? Do I want that guy anywhere near the button? Do I want him anywhere near the nuclear launch codes? Absolutely not. Alec Baldwin on Saturday Night Live sends him into a Twitter tailspin. How is he going to handle North Korea? Do I look at the way he conducts himself in any context and think he is a walking, talking, living cartoon? Yes. Do I think his presidency represents some very bad ideas out there? And do I stand against that because I'm being true to my values? Many people feel this, they feel it in their bones, and they are trying to communicate the danger to other people, and some people are guilty of slipping into hyperbole, of overstatement. They're trying too hard, but they're trying to get you to listen. I understand how it happens. From my perspective, we don't need hyperbole to sound a very loud alarm bell. There are plenty of legitimate instances, documented instances, that stand on their own merit that don't require us to color outside the lines. The instance is enough. The facts are enough for us to be outraged. Already I can tell people are going to take snippets and sound bites and little pet pieces of whatever they just heard, and they're going to run with it. I get why Mario sometimes gets frustrated. And I understand why the liberal progressives like myself are frustrated. We look and we see so many people are not listening. They're certainly not understanding. Everybody's shouting. Nobody's listening. Everybody's sending. Nobody's receiving. Everybody's right. Everybody else is wrong. We're splintered. We are divided. We are ripped right down the middle. I don't think both sides are equal. I do think one side is more on the side of right. But isn't that just how these arguments go? Coming up in just a second, my next guest is a guy named Justin Scott. Justin likes to approach politicians, many of them devoutly religious. He approaches with a video camera in hand, and he announces that he is an atheist voter and asks how these politicians intend to represent all Americans, including non-religious people. And I'm going to play some sound bites from that and speak with Justin Scott in just a second. Hang on. We live in an on-demand world. We can point and click and select and see and hear whatever, whenever. So why are so many of us still driving to the post office when we can get postage on demand with Stamps.com? I've used Stamps.com for years. I used them when we did the big signed mailouts of both book releases. We just did it all in my home using Stamps.com. So much easier and faster and better than driving around and standing in line at the post office and fumbling with rolls of stamps and all that. I mean, anything you can do at the post office, you can do right from your desk at Stamps.com. Buy and print official U.S. postage for any letter or package from your own computer with your own printer on your own time. Because unlike the post office, Stamps.com never closes. And right now, sign up for Stamps.com with my name, Seth Andrews, in the special offer window, and you get a 4-week trial and a $110 bonus offer, including postage and a digital scale. So don't wait. Go to Stamps.com before you do anything else. Click on the microphone at the top of the homepage and type in Seth Andrews. That's Stamps.com. Enter Seth Andrews. FYI, real fast, because I think some people in this audience might be interested, David G. McAfee contacted me after the 2016 presidential election and sort of, I guess, sensing the temperature out there and the frustration with both the Republicans and the Democrats by many. He founded, or at least co-founded, but I think he founded it outright, the Party of Reason and Progress, a political party. I went to the website and the About page says this. The Party of Reason and Progress is a nonprofit organization dedicated to adequately informing the American public regarding modern political issues and policies. Our goal is to spur the election of intelligent, logical, and rational candidates interested foremost in moving our nation in a positive and progressive direction. Without the limitations of strict party platforms such as those imposed by the current dominant political party dichotomy, the Party of Reason and Progress can approach each individual decision from a logical, rational, and reasonable standpoint, with an emphasis on maintaining a strong separation of church and state, ensuring universal civil liberties and social freedoms, and cutting economic costs by limiting unnecessary military spending and reducing bureaucratic waste. Anyway, that's the first part of that page. That might be of interest to you. The website is partyofreasonandprogress.org. That's partyofreasonandprogress.org. I'll be interested to watch the evolution of this endeavor in the weeks, months, perhaps even years ahead. Next up on my roster is a gentleman named Justin Scott. He had sent some clips over the years that I've been interested in. He is known by many as the Iowa Atheist, and he will approach people in public office and ask them very direct and pointed questions about atheists and non-religious voters here in the United States. And the answers he gets back are often very interesting and very telling. Justin Scott joins me here. Hey, man, it's great to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Seth.
So tell me what your stick is. You just walk around with a camera and a microphone and just any target of opportunity or what?
Yeah, it's kind of, there's been no game plan whatsoever. I've been telling people when I share my story that it all started on a day that I was tired of running my small business. And so I decided to see what was going on in my community. And Rick Santorum was in town during the Iowa caucus season. And I thought, I should go out and listen to him talk. And I had just listened to David Silverman on a podcast talk about how atheists need to get out and actually be vocal and be present and admit that they are an atheist in public. And one thing led to another. And, I had no plan of how I was going to do this. But once I shot the first video of me asking Rick questions, kind of steamrolled from there.
What kind of questions?
I didn't come in with any plan. Like I said, I just went up to Rick and I said, well, why should atheists vote for somebody like you who claims to be so devout in your religious beliefs that you'd like to see us move kind of more towards a Christian theocracy of sorts? And surprisingly, he took my questions. And when I got home, I kind of sent an email out to Hemet Mehta at the Friendly Atheist, and I said, hey, man, I got some video. Does this work? Is this good? And right away, he's like, oh, my God, this is amazing. Like,
wait, can I play a clip from that? His answer?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, let me just break away and play part of Rick Santorum's answer to your question. This clip's just a little bit tough to hear, but hang with it.
If anything, I would say that I don't reach out to them. I just lay out principles. I think our values and principles that are conservative, that make sense, that are best for society, best for our country. And whether you're a believer or not a believer, if you're a reasonable person and you use your gift of reason, you can sort of see whether this is in the best interest. Let's take the issue of family. I'm a big supporter of marriage and family. Why? Because it's best for society. Stable marriages in which children grow up in is without a doubt the best situation for a child to be raised in America. You don't have to be religious. You don't have to believe in the sacrament of marriage. You don't have to believe that marriage is a religious institution. Believe it as a civil institution that is important for children to be raised by, I always say, the birthright, a natural mom and natural dad in a stable and healthy home. Does that reach out to atheists? I mean, I don't know whether atheists or non-atheists should look at that issue any different.
Who were some of the other names and faces you've encountered along your travels?
Pretty much every major presidential candidate from this last cycle.
How do you get access to them? I mean, are you just that tenacious?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a mix of that, and then also just being in the right place at the right time. Living in Iowa, you have a tremendous opportunity to get in front of these folks because they realize they have to go to every coffee shop and pizza place in order to get votes.
In your opinion, what are some of the most interesting answers you've gotten back from some of these politicians? You're approaching them as an atheist, as someone who's representing a secular demographic, a secular voting bloc. In your opinion, what are some of the greatest hits?
Looking back, I was actually pleasantly surprised by the interaction that I had with Mr. Santorum and then also Mike Huckabee. Despite being some of the more religious of all the candidates, they were actually some of the nicer ones to talk to. They actually wanted to have a conversation with me. Rand Paul was at a university probably 10 minutes from where I live, totally refused to talk to me. At one point, I actually got him on video, like running away from me. And, all I was doing was saying, hey, I have a couple questions for you. Do you mind answering them for me? And would not do it, wouldn't even look at me. And I thought,
why run from you? Did you have an atheist T-shirt on or what?
Yeah. Towards the latter part of my efforts during the presidential campaigns, I had a red atheist voter shirt, Compliments of American Atheists. They really helped me in this effort. So the thing is, though, the font that said, or the part on the shirt that said atheist wasn't that big. So it's not like it was, the whole size of my chest. I mean, it was this little tiny thing. But at a lot of the events, I would stand up and they'd say, does anybody have a question? And I would say, yeah, I do. And hi, I'm an atheist voter, so on and so forth. And I'd ask the question.
Who else on your greatest hits list?
Ted Cruz, Ted Cruz he answered it with a lot of rhetoric. You could tell that he had been polished in how to answer to kind of this religious freedom question. I asked him, he said a lot of bad things about atheists, so I asked him, why should an atheist vote for him? And one of the most popular responses I got was, well, you have a right not to believe, but we hope you come back to Jesus.
Oh, let's play a piece of that exchange, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
Well, one of the great things about the First Amendment is that it protects the religious liberty of every American. We're a nation that was founded by men and women who were fleeing religious oppression and coming to America to start a nation where every one of us was free to live according to our faith, according to our conscience. Listen, I'll tell you, as a believer, I hope that one day you come to be a believer, but it is your right, it is your prerogative with free will to make your own decisions, to make your own determinations. And I'll tell you, the beautiful thing about freedom is freedom gives every one of us the freedom to live our lives according to our conscience and according to our right. You describe yourself as a conservative. If you look at what we're seeing in Washington, we're seeing government power. Government power at the expense of individual liberty, at the expense of hardworking men and women who are not able to find jobs, not able to provide for their families, not able to achieve the American dream. We're seeing our constitutional rights under assault every day, whether it's free speech, which for atheists is particularly important, whether it's religious liberty, which atheists have a right as well to not believe, whether it's the Second Amendment or privacy of the 10th Amendment. I've spent my whole life fighting to defend the Bill of Rights and Constitution, and as president, every day I will defend the Bill of Rights and Constitution wherever it's at.
So, even though I listened to what Ted Cruz said and I kind of rolled my eyes at it, at least he answered it. He's one of those line in the sand types where you definitely know where he is on an issue. Now with President-elect Trump, I actually got to shake hands with him and ask him, if he becomes president, how would he uphold or strengthen the separation of church and state? Now, mind you, this is after waiting out in 20 below weather for 2 hours to get into this event. I worked all the way up to the fence line, listened to his entire campaign speech, and then as he came to me, his security guards kept saying, "Keep your hands up, keep your hands up." Well, here I've got my phone in my pocket in my cargo pants, and I'm thinking, "Oh, great! I'm going to be that guy that gets tackled when I go to videotape this." But I pulled my phone out and I said, "Mr. Trump, how would you do this?" And he's signing an autograph, and he kind of just goes, "Uh-huh." And so I'm like sitting there like, okay, well, maybe the music's too loud. Maybe he didn't hear me. And I said, "Mr. Trump, did you hear my question?" And he goes, "Uh-huh." And so by then I get mad. I'm like thinking, well, you're just ignoring me. I've done enough of these events. I've had interactions with all the other candidates. Now I'm starting to get a little irked. So I said, "Mr. Trump, I asked you a question. I expect an answer." And he kind of lunges over to me and he taps me on the arm and he says, "You take care now." And he walks away. And it was actually a couple days later where he went out to Liberty University and messed up the 2 Corinthians line.
2 Corinthians?
Yep, 2 Corinthians walk into a bar. So at that point, I actually went up to my wife and I said, yeah, it totally makes sense. I probably caught him with a question that he really wasn't prepared to answer.
I have a feeling there are a lot of questions he's not remotely prepared to answer.
Yeah, I just want to say we're doing this as a radio interview over the phone, but I'm wearing my Star Wars Resistance shirt. I'll just leave it at that.
The rebel scum that you are.
Right. That's right.
The title of the broadcast is One Nation Divisible, kind of a riff on the Pledge of Allegiance. And we talk about the divisions between us. Passions are high. These heated discussions, these heated arguments, a shouting match every 5 seconds. Social media, it was almost intolerable around the day of the election, the week before, the month before the election, and it hasn't gotten much better. And you see, we're all drawing these lines in the sand, and I'm guilty. I unfriended a few people, not because you disagree with me, therefore I'm going to unfriend you. But there were just a few people who were sort of in that outer membrane, the people that had friended you that you knew 20 years ago, you went to high school with 30 years ago, and they were sort of out there. And you would see the stuff that they would post. And I'm guilty in some ways of losing respect for the person who posts fallacious or unreasonable argument time after time after time after time. It's like if someone posts a Josh Feuerstein video to promote religion, there's a part of me that dies inside. And there's a part of me where my respect for you dies inside just a little bit. I'm guilty of that. I don't know if it's right or it's wrong. I'm not saying that I unfriended all the people that I know who voted Trump. I absolutely didn't. But there were just a few. There were a couple where I hit a point of critical mass and I'm like, I'm out. I cannot watch this train wreck anymore. Click. And I just made that disconnect. It made me feel better. I don't know. Can anybody relate to that? And does it make me a bad person?
I don't think so at all. I'm in the same boat. Even during my efforts during the presidential campaign, during the Iowa caucus especially, a lot of my Iowa friends, people that I had gone to school with, gone to college with, known for years, even people that I'm related with, or related to, whether it's through blood or marriage, would kind of take pot shots and say, "Oh, you atheist, all you do is cry and whine." And then, fast forward to today, here we are a year after I interviewed Mr. Santorum. I just got told this morning that if I don't like the way Trump is going to do things, that I should just up and leave.
Just leave the country, damn it.
And it's like, does that really solve anything, And That's what's so frustrating. And for the listeners that are actually Facebook friends with me that I've met through the last couple of months that have jumped onto the Justin Facebook train ride that is, you know that I post stuff that's controversial, but I welcome a dialogue because I think that's how we get things out. And we also kind of act as fact checkers for one another.
And I want to draw a circle around that because there are some who would jump into a thread and and somebody defend Ben Carson of all things. And so did I unfriend them? No. What I did was I presented a case as to why I oppose Ben Carson in any real position of authority and or power. When it comes to the halls of government, he's not the guy I want. And here's why. It was an exchange. We didn't end up changing each other's minds, but it wasn't like, screw you, I'm unfriending you. Those instances are rare. But when I hear someone like the person who told you, if you don't love it, leave, right? Check out, go to Canada, go somewhere else. Essentially, that's a majority rule argument. Absolutely. Because if they had lost the election or their candidate had lost or their idea had lost, and we had said to them, you know what, if you don't like it, get out, they would have puffed out their chest and become indignant and said, no, absolutely not. This is my country too, and I'm going to fight for what I think is right. It's a huge double standard.
Absolutely. And I don't want to name drop, but one of the biggest inspirations besides yourself for me was Matt Dillahunty. And if you watch his debate style and you watch the way he takes calls on his show, he gives you every opportunity to lay out your defense of your argument or your defense of your statement or whatever claim you want to put out there. But he holds your feet to the fire until he basically lets you make him hang up on you. And that's my thing. I don't try to go into these conversations saying, if you say this, I'm going to hang up on you or unfriend you. But I definitely agree with what you said about, God, I just look at you differently now. If I see you on the street and I know that you publicly boasted about a certain candidate or supporting a certain candidate's ideals, and you can't even back it up, and you just want to say, if you don't like it, tough shit, get out of here. I really have a problem with that. I really do look at you a little differently.
Someone says, oh, the Muslims. I immediately think you don't have the first damn clue what you're talking about. Your equity in terms of the merit of what you say has just been diminished. It doesn't mean that we're enemies. It doesn't mean that I hate you. It does affect how I perceive you.
Absolutely. And you're in probably even more of a conservative area than I am. But here in Northeast Iowa, I even look at the way that certain communities talk about things and the way they deal with things. And then I kind of look at the demographics and I'm like, wow, you're 98% white and you're 99% Christian. Whole lot of diversity going on back home, isn't there? Just recently, I was invited by hopefully I'm saying this right, by a Jewish rabbi to take part in an interfaith council here locally. And I had some reservations and I had some atheist friends that were like, oh, no, we don't need to do that because then you're propping up religion. But I said, you know what? We need to do this to get the atheist worldview out there, to get the secular humanist worldview out there. And I recently got to take part in kind of a prayer for candidates or prayer for elected officials type of thing. And I gave a secular invocation, and obviously it wasn't a prayer. But at one point, there was a Muslim woman who brought her 10-year-old daughter up on the stage to present a speech about unity and peace. And I sat there, and as she talked, I kind of thought about all of my white friends, and I hate to pick on them, but all of those friends that fit into that profile of all Muslims are bad and all Muslims are evil. And I sat there and I went, I think Islam is as batshit crazy as all the rest of the religions out there. But at the same time, I'm looking at two human beings that identify as Muslims that are talking about peace and unity. Come join me, come sit beside me and hear this 10-year-old girl talk, and then tell me that all Muslims want to kill us.
It reveals, as Christianity reveals, a distancing from the fundamentals of your faith, from your own scriptures, from the literal verses of your holy book, and you have created a different faith that fits your personality, a more peaceful, a more enlightened personality. Certainly it's still based on bad ideas, but these are complex issues that don't fit easily on a bumper sticker. And I think in the internet age, in the social media age, and the 140 whatever characters of Twitter age, it's becoming harder and harder to really discuss them. Justin, I'm going to send everybody a link to your YouTube page so they can watch some more of these encounters with various politicians, but I appreciate your time and your perspective on this broadcast, and keep doing what you're doing, all right?
Yeah, thank you so much, Seth.
There was an article that came out a few years ago in The Atlantic titled The Divided States of America in 25 Charts. And I think the article is still relevant today. It says, every day we hear about how society is splitting apart, a polarized Congress, a fragmented media market, a persistent schism among Americans over social issues. But really, how bad are the divisions? They're pretty bad, according to the results of the Atlantic Aspen Institute American Values Survey released today. As America approaches its 237th birthday, it's feeling quite a bit more pluribus than unum, says Don Baer and Mark Plen elsewhere on this site on their full analysis of the survey. And they have several charts. I'm not going to read all 25 to you, but just some of the basics. 6 in 10 say America has grown more divided in the last decade, and Americans say we're more divided today than any time since the Great Depression, with the exception of the Civil Rights era. 1 in 5 doubt that America will remain united as one country going forward. 20% say that there's going to be some kind of a splintering or subset of America. More than 6 in 10 Americans, including a plurality of Republicans, say that elected officials mainly reflect the values of the wealthy. It was interesting to see the statistics on President Barack Obama. 21% surveyed said he was the most unifying figure in America today. 33% said he was the most divisive figure in America today. The most divisive social issues, as reflected in the big news stories: gun control topped that list, gay marriage after that, immigration, abortion, homosexuality, drugs, climate change, capital punishment, and then after that, divorce and several others. More than half say the free market economy helps the American dream. 4 of 5 say reducing the gap between the rich and the poor is important. Fewer Americans embrace religion. But 6 in 10 still believe that religion unites us. 29% of Americans surveyed believe in creationism only. They reject evolution outright. 29%, 48% believe in a combination of evolution and creationism. I'm trying to reconcile those two. I'm guessing it's a guided evolution model of some kind. Finally, what key phrases in the Pledge of Allegiance are the most important or applies most to us? 58% said the most important words in the pledge were one nation. 48% said under God, and yes, I know under God was not in the original pledge. Indivisible at 45%, with liberty 53%. This is kind of an odd question, I think. Anyway, it's in the archives at The Atlantic if you'd like to read the article. It is titled again, The Divided States of America in 25 Charts. Rebecca Markert is managing staff attorney from the Freedom from Religion Foundation. We've talked about the FFRF quite a bit. I've had Dan Barker on the broadcast before. And talk to me, Rebecca, about the things that the FFRF is doing right now, some of the big battles that you're facing and some of the things that are on your front burner.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. We are gearing up for the next year under the new Trump administration. We are deeply concerned about the future of state-church separation issues, and we're ready to fight back against the administration, which is already showing signs to...
Can you give me some specific examples?
Sure.
Some of the alarm bells you're seeing out there?
One of the biggest alarm bells that we received within the last couple of days is the choice of Betsy DeVos for Secretary of Education. She is well known to be in favor of voucher schemes, these so-called school choice programs, which really just funnel taxpayer money into religious schools and religious organizations. These types of schemes really benefit the religious organizations, namely churches, over students. And we're really concerned about what that will not only do for our public education system, but also what that does for state-church separation. It really is blurring the line.
Are you seeing a high degree of religiosity in many of the people that Trump is floating for key positions?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Even before he announced Ms. DeVos as Secretary of Education, has now come out that his first choice was actually Jerry Falwell Jr., who, is the head of a religious university, Liberty University. And that university's motto is Training Champions for Christ since 1971, so it is very alarming. His choice for Attorney General is also a very religious man, former Senator Jeff Sessions. He's not a fan of state-church separation. He doesn't believe that it's an actual constitutional principle. And he's had many actions in the Senate that would indicate that he would destroy the wall if he could. There's actually a story. He sat on the Senate Judiciary Committee, and when Senator Patrick Leahy from Vermont was the chair of that committee, they would hold hearings and they would swear in witnesses. And I guess it became an issue because Senator Leahy was swearing them in, but not using the religious oath at the end, not saying, "So help me God." And Senator Sessions gave him a public rebuke of that. And he said, 95% of the people that are coming here are Christians, and we should be asking them to swear religious oaths when they are coming here to testify. So, yes, he's absolutely one of those we're a Christian nation believers.
Rebecca, what's your take? I mean, we're talking about a splintered nation. There are so many people out there who are of such wildly differing opinions, and they're all right, and they're all shouting at the top of their voices. And here we are, supposedly one nation indivisible, and yet it seems we are anything but. Do you have a perspective on just how split or splintered we are as a country and how to move forward?
Well, I definitely think that the 2016 election just showed how divided we really are and how big the gap is, particularly between the coast states and the flyover states. And to be quite honest, personally, after the election, I woke up the next morning and I thought, how do we bridge this divide? There has to be something that we can do, extending empathy and trying to talk with each other to really understand the differences. Because I think when we strip away a lot of this stuff, we all basically want the same thing, and we just have different ways of getting there. But I think at this point, we need to be able to talk to each other and really start educating each other on our stances and our histories, our experiences, and really getting to know each other so that we can start bridging these big divides. I think it is a huge problem, and I think we can't continually draw lines in the sand. We really have to sort of extend an olive branch across the aisle and try to figure out how we are going to move forward together.
Well, this is unpopular. I'd mentioned this earlier in the broadcast. Understanding the opposition is one of the first steps. Properly representing the opposition is important if we're going to have any sort of discourse or dialogue. And what happens is many people say, this is weakness. We're watering ourselves down, right? Just throw a bomb over the wall and try to blow the bad ideas to smithereens kind of a thing. It certainly would feel good. All right. You're a racist. You're a bigot. You're ignorant. You're stupid. You're the worst person in the world. For many people, that's the response. That's how we're going to solve the problem. I don't know that that's a productive way to proceed. I think we're going to have dialogue if anything is going to change.
Right. I would completely agree with that. I think once the conversation is just that, where you're just saying you're a racist, you're a bigot, that shuts everybody down. Nobody wants to be called that. I mean, even honestly, if that's what they are, nobody wants to be told you are something bad. And that's just going to shut down the conversation right away, and we're never going to get anywhere. And
it's complicated because people are now saying, well, how do you call out racism and bigotry if you never say racism and bigotry? We're not saying that. We're not saying you don't call it out. We're saying that if you're in the arena of ideas, you don't lead with, you're a bigot, here's why you should change your mind.
Right.
There might be a better tactic. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, if somebody is saying something or doing something that is outright racist or bigoted, they need to be called out on that, and they need to know that is not okay. But if it is merely a difference in an issue area, then you can't say, well, the only reason you think that way is because you're a racist. That's not going to get us anywhere.
It's hard, isn't it? I mean, we're in a culture that loves to fight. Mm-hmm. You work for the FFRF, for Pete's sake. You guys are always going after somebody for something, right?
Right.
You're entering The war on Christmas season, I'm sure we're well into it. Have you seen any war on Christmas rumblings out there yet? I think I saw one or two headlines posted on social media from Fox News, but have you seen anything yet?
Well, we are currently in litigation over our Bill of Rights nativity that was denied last Christmas season.
Spell it out for me. What is the Bill of Rights nativity and where did you want to display it?
Sure. The Bill of Rights nativity is actually just our founding fathers looking at the Bill of Rights. It looks like the nativity scene with the Holy Family looking at the baby Jesus, but instead you have our founding fathers looking at the Constitution and the Bill of Rights nestled in that hay bale. And it's a beautiful monument, in my opinion. I think it says a lot, and we've used it to counter nativity scenes across the country, and it's been put up in capitals and courthouse lawns and things like that across the country in the last year. But we tried to put it up in the Texas state capitol where there is a nativity every year, and in order to do that, you need to get a sponsor from one of the legislators, and then they need to approve your display. We asked a bunch of the representatives down in Texas to sponsor us. We were actually sort of surprised when we found not one, but two legislators who are interested in sponsoring our display, and we went to put it up. As soon as it was put up, it was actually taken down by order of the governor, who said that it was an offensive display. Yes, Greg Abbott called the Bill of Rights an offensive
just
display.
So offensive.
It's very offensive. So we're currently in litigation over that, but those are the types of displays and things that we're doing across the country.
You're looking at an assertion of privilege, people who are used to being able to promote a single religion over all others or none, and they're not used to being challenged. And it's healthy for them to be challenged. And that's why you do what you do, right?
Exactly. And as the demographics in this country change, they are going to be challenged more and more. And things that they've been doing for 40 or 60 years, putting that nativity scene on the courthouse lawn, and nobody's saying boo about it because there were 98% of the citizenry were Christian and thought that it was a nice monument. Well, now that they don't have that majority, it's not as inappropriate of a display for a courthouse lawn.
Just move it over move it onto private property, right?
Right?
Move it to private property, and it's all good. We're not trying to kill your particular celebration of Christmas. We're not removing your right to celebrate in whatever you want. We're just saying get it off of public taxpayer-funded property,
right,
and put it on a private property somewhere else.
Exactly.
So as we're talking about the Constitution, I'm sure you saw the recent headline where Donald Trump actually was in Twitter, where he was talking about how those who burn the American flag should have their citizenship revoked and or face jail time. And of course, Twitter again had to correct him on the facts as to what is legal and illegal in the United States. Do you have a thought or perspective on the whole flag burning thing?
Well, I think, as a civil rights attorney and somebody who practices in the First Amendment regularly, we not only handle Establishment Clause issues, state church separation issues, but we've also been taking on a lot of free speech cases because a lot of our members, when we can't win on the state church ground, we can possibly win on a free speech ground where our voice has been excluded, but a Christian voice or another religious voice has been included. So we've been taking on a lot of these free speech cases in recent years, and that sort of tweet is very troubling to a civil rights attorney. Not only does he fundamentally misunderstand the First Amendment, but it also signals to us that he's not a fan of it. And, it puts those protections that protect all of us on shaky ground, and not just flag burning, but the right to sit for the pledge or the right to not say the pledge, which, includes religious wording, things like that. All of that seem to be targets for potential attacks. And that's very concerning to a First Amendment attorney. And it should be concerning to everybody.
Looking ahead to 2017, we see some encouraging statistics with the rise of the nuns, the non-religious. Do you have any thoughts, final thoughts on the year and years ahead of us?
I really am probably in the minority, but I really feel optimistic about where our movement is going and what we can accomplish in 2017. And maybe it is the part of my complex that has I'm always in the minority, always fighting, and I'm ready and geared up for another fight. But I'm really optimistic because in the weeks after our election in 2016, I've just seen so many people wanting to get active and get involved, more so than I have seen in my 8 years of working at FFRF. We have so many of our own members who are contacting us saying, what can we do? I want to help. What do you think the biggest issues are? Where can we go? What can we do? Who can we call? And even just in my personal relationships, I have friends who are like, you know what, I'm going to run for that school board seat. I'm going to run for county board. There are so many people that seem to want to get active and involved and really make a difference in their own communities that I feel like, yes, we not only have the numbers on our side, but now we also have the activism and the excitement, and we're channeling a lot of anger to do really positive and good things and getting involved and staying involved. And even if it's not running for elected office or becoming a plaintiff in a big lawsuit that involves civil rights or something like that, but just being a citizen activist where you're calling your legislator and saying, I disagree with this. This cabinet appointment is not okay. This bill is not okay. Those types of things are really positive changes that can really make a difference. And I really believe that we're going to be able to take this really negative situation and turn it into a really positive thing for our movement moving forward.
Rebecca Markert, Managing Staff Attorney at the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Check out their websites and support them at ffrf.org. Rebecca, thanks so much for your time and perspective. I hope the holidays are great for you, and we'll be watching what happens here as we move toward the new year, okay?
All right. Thank you very much.
Matthew Bulger is the Legislative Director for the American Humanist Association. Amanda Knief is National Legal and Policy Director for American Atheists, and Michael Dora is the Center for Inquiry Director of Government Affairs. All three join me right now on the radio, and it's great to have you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So the title of the broadcast is One Nation Divisible. We're speaking about the political divides, rather, here in the United States. It's interesting to watch the divides even among atheists, whether or not Hillary was a great candidate or Bernie should have been the candidate, or there are a few out there who are pro-Trump supporters, and they're pissed off that this show and its host have not been flattering, have not been very complimentary of Donald Trump. Have you guys noticed this splintering, this divide here in the United States?
Yes, I have seen a lot of strong opinion through the campaign season about the different candidates, both for and against Trump, for and against Clinton, for and against Bernie Sanders. Atheists aren't a monolith. We have large groups of people who, within the atheist community, who believe other things, but really there's nothing other than our lack of belief in gods or the supernatural that really unites us. And so it's a challenge, I think, for those of us who work in public policy, for those of us who work with government, to try to come up with a policy that does represent our interests. And so we try to stick to things where religion really is playing a part. And I think the problem we're seeing for the Trump administration is how many of the people he's nominating for his cabinet and the people who he is surrounding himself with as advisors use religion either as a determination for their public policy or as a way to divide people. And we think that that is an issue.
How frightened should we be with Trump, Pence in place? How much power do you think they wield? How much resistance are they going to get? Matthew Bulger.
I think that they, obviously have a large degree of power with not only control of the executive branch, but also the legislature as well. And there's a lot to be concerned about, not just with statutory law, but also with allocation of funding. We've heard that there are desires to remove politicized science funding from NASA, which impacts a whole variety of different things. We're also obviously concerned about the budget reconciliation process and the ability for the administration and the legislature to pass a lot of unpopular, controversial legislation on a simple majority vote without the use of the filibuster. But Amanda probably can also speak to some of that as well.
I think that we should be very concerned. You do not seem to have a Republican Party in Congress that is willing to stand up to this administration. Jason Chaffetz, who was a strong proponent against government problems and issues and was all over Hillary Clinton for anything that she might have done as Secretary of State, and was saying that we were still going to be holding hearings even though she wasn't elected, says that there's no need to investigate anything that Donald Trump might have wrong with his business interests. He hasn't even been put into office yet. So whether we see Republicans in Congress willing to stand up to Trump, willing to make a stand morally for all people in this country, I think that we've seen them already kind of say, well, we'd rather have power and we'd rather get our agenda passed, and we're willing to horse trade for it. We've seen Republican after Republican who opposed Trump before he was elected basically say, well, he's elected, he's going to do a great job, ignoring everything that they warned us about or they were concerned about before the election. I think one of the things we should be most concerned about is climate change. It is a huge issue. The United States needs to be a leader on it. And we have someone who was posting just a couple of years ago that it was a conspiracy from China. He's not educating himself on issues. He doesn't seem to care about intelligence briefings, and was going around a dining room a few nights ago asking people if he should pick Mayor Giuliani or Mitt Romney for Secretary of State, just asking random people their opinion. I think we should be very afraid.
Michael Dora, did you want to jump in on any of this?
The question that I've been reflecting on over the past couple of weeks is what can we do then in response to what we expect will happen? And I think that there, in my mind, are at least two things that are important to note. One is that we cannot allow a Trump administration to divide Americans, especially Americans who should be fighting on the same side with one another to protect minority rights and to protect separation of church and state and to protect the future of the planet from climate change. And so you have Stephen Bannon, who's been named the chief strategist for the Trump administration, who is someone who has been running Breitbart, which is a news website that in part depends on spreading conspiracy theories to run a successful website and using those conspiracy theories to kind of stoke hatred against minority groups. And so I think it's important that as Americans, we remain vigilant about that. I think the second point is that now more than ever, the ability of Americans, the capacity of Americans to call and to lobby their elected officials is important, because the only way that any of the harmful proposals that the Trump administration wants to get through Congress will get stopped is if members of Congress are completely overloaded with phone calls and emails and meetings, requests for meetings and letter writing campaigns and whatnot, telling these elected officials that they should not support what the Trump administration wants. And so I think it's really important that Americans start to kind of get prepared over the next 6 to 12 months, if not the next 4 years, to regularly be involved in picking up their phones and sending emails to their elected officials at all levels of government, especially Congress, to let these elected officials know that the constituents' pulse is a bit different than what the elected officials' pulse might be.
There's a narrative out there that if you're out there protesting, you're waving the placards and you're shouting that this is outrageous and we stand against it, that you are somehow anti-patriotic. You don't love your country, love it or leave it, get out. Let's talk very quickly about patriotism, perhaps patriotism versus nationalism. Anybody want to speak to this? Protest in a country that you love.
I suppose the only thing I would say about that is that exercising your First Amendment rights seems to me the highest level of achievement of patriotism. We have First Amendment rights that allow people to go out on the streets and protest about just about anything, as long as they're not inciting imminent violence. And so I think exercising those rights is to be a patriot, regardless of what you're going out and protesting. Now, of course, we can talk about the specifics of what people are protesting, but I think if you have an election that was very controversial and tight, and you have a candidate who is known for making controversial statements and known for making, quite frankly, degrading statements about minority groups and minorities and other people, it would make sense that if that candidate wins, that people would feel a lot of anger and disappointment and frustration with the result of the election. And so the inherent right, I think, of people to protest is important. But on a more practical note, I think it makes sense to allow people and if not encourage people to go out and take to the streets and protest, because it's kind of a valve to let some of that steam off. But I think more importantly, in terms of the imaging of it, you have a situation in which you have a lot of Americans who don't want to allow Trump and the Trump administration and the people that are going to be appointed here to become kind of normalized or mainstreamed.
You want to talk, for anybody want to speak about the alt-right, the white nationalism that many people are writing about in the wake of the Trump presidency, perhaps what propelled the Trump presidency? Is there merit to that? And you want to flesh it out, define it, talk about it?
Well, I'd actually love to just comment real quickly on Michael said. I think he's completely right in that you have to allow people to blow off steam. I believe it was JFK who said that if you make peaceful protest impossible, you make a violent revolution inevitable. And I think that's completely accurate. There needs to be a fundamental right for individuals to go out to speak their minds. And the idea that we would ever ban even distasteful speech, whether it's burning a flag, saying something that people largely disagree with, I think is just opposed to the fundamental principles that this country was based upon. As for the rise of the alt-right, it's not the preferred term that I would use. For many of them, I would say white nationalists, white supremacists. Obviously, you can't paint an entire movement with a broad brush, but I think that there is a lot of concern, especially within the humanist community, which is seen as more progressive, with the rise of individuals who seem to relish in targeting marginalized communities with hate speech, with promoting policies that would put America back over 200 years, would remove a lot of our progress toward racial and religious plurality.
Amanda Knief?
I think it's really important that we call them what they are. They are white supremacists. That it's really important that when Trump lies, we say Trump is lying. If we try to couch it in nice terms, if we try to I see the mainstream media trying to couch these terms and trying not to call Trump a liar. If we don't call it what it is, we risk hiding the truth and shying away from it. I think that there's this great scene at the end of The American President when Michael Douglas is talking about the way to win elections is you gather a group of people and you tell them about a better time and, remind them how things used to be, and then you tell them who's to blame for why it's not. And I think that's what Trump did. And, his targets are people who are different, Muslims, immigrants, people with disabilities, even women. And so it's really important that we fight against that as a country. I'm very worried if there was another terrorist attack, we would see something like the Patriot Act on steroids enacted against our freedoms. And to speak to that, one of the things I think that might be slightly overlooked is Trump's influence on the judiciary. Now, a lot of people have focused on the Supreme Court, which is very important. But the Supreme Court hears less than 100 cases a year. And there are literally about 10,000 cases in federal court every year. And so that means many, many, many more precedents are set at the district and the appeals court levels. And right now, there are more than 80 vacancies left that President Obama will not get to fill at those two levels, on the federal and the district and the appeals court levels. So Trump right away will get to fill those with a Republican majority in the Senate that's already at 51. And there's still a race to be decided in Louisiana on December 10th. So, they only take a simple majority to approve judges. If he gets 4 years, and the average number of judges that a 4-year president gets is about 160, he'll be able to affect, plus with the ones left over from the Obama administration, 30% of the district and appeals court judgeships will be determined by a Trump presidency. And we're going to start seeing that effect, maybe not in the first year or the second year, but we're going to start seeing us not being able to get in the courthouse doors. We're going to start seeing impacts on our freedom of speech, on religious liberty decisions, and on precedents. It doesn't matter what the Supreme Court does if we can't even get in the courthouse or get beyond that, because a lot of times we don't have the money and we don't have the means to get up to the upper courts. So I think anything that we can do, American Atheists is putting out a statement, an explanation of how to oppose federal judgeships, how to speak to your home state senator if there's one from your state that's being nominated. And we're going to be working with a coalition of groups to really keep an eye on the district and the appeals court judgeship process, because we think this is one of the most fundamental ways that the Trump presidency could affect our country, not just in the next 4 years, but the next 20 or 30 years.
Rebecca Markert earlier from the FFRF saying she thought that perhaps all of this had lit a fire under many people who were about human rights and about secular values. They had perhaps been dormant before the election, had kind of an oh shit moment, and now at least they're active and activated and trying to work toward positive change. Any final thoughts on that as we wrap up? Are you seeing a surge in interest and urgency, or what's the temperature out there? Anybody?
Sure, I'll chime in on that. The day after the election, I came into the office down here in Washington, D.C., and there was understandably a pretty depressed mood about the outcome of the election. Understandably, given how much the outcome of the election will have a harmful impact on issues such as separation of church and state, science, and a number of other issues that atheists, humanists, and secularists care about. But one of the things that I have been heartened by over the past couple of weeks, and really going back before Election Day, past couple of months, is the number of people who I remember through the course of my life have never been involved in politics whatsoever and never really concerned themselves with politics whatsoever. In fact, I was looked at by a lot of my friends as somewhat of a nerd, a geek, and a weirdo for caring so much about these policy issues, and suddenly the people who used to think that and used to say those things to me are now texting me and calling me on a regular basis saying, what the heck is going on with this world and how can I get involved to make a change? And so that's one of the things that I'm heartened by. I think that sometimes people need a kind of earth-shattering event and a clear image of what it is that they find abhorrent to feel motivated enough to get involved in a political or social movement. And, we can lament how sad it is that is what's needed sometimes, but I'm hoping that an entire new generation of activists has been born by this election that will shape policy over the next generation.
I think it's really important that people not get overwhelmed by what they see is happening in DC and in the federal government, and realize that they can still affect change. They should join a local group, join a national group, but really the most important thing to do is get involved locally. There's so much that could be done by letting your local officials know, whether it's your city council, your state legislature, your governor. We need people to speak up and get involved in their local organizations, whether that means you want to get involved in a political party or a local volunteer organization. But really, we need that grassroots movement. And we need people to speak up and be willing to put in the time and the energy. And if everybody does just a little bit, it really adds up. So it's not like we have to take it all on at once. We will take each issue as it comes. We'll break it down. We're not the only movement that is scared and working and collaborating. We're working with all kinds of partners in DC, all three of us and others. And so we just need more people to step up and say, hey, I'm working here locally in Minnesota, in Texas, in Arkansas, in Maine. And, I'm here if you need a local person to do this, and to start speaking up there. And that is how we will affect change, is from the ground up, because it's not going to happen from the top down.
And she didn't ask me to do this, but Amanda has written a book released 3 years ago called The Citizen Lobbyist, which is a how-to manual for making your voice heard in government, be it local, state, or federal. So it's a great little how-to. It's an easy read, and you can find it easily on Amazon. And so that's a great resource. Matthew, you want to wrap us up here?
Yeah, the only other thing that I would add is that people are right to be concerned and even afraid about some of the changes that are likely to come down the legislative pipeline in the next few years, as well as with some of the appointments that are currently being made right now. But I also want people to recognize that we do still have the potential to work with both parties in Congress. There is a brief window for us to work together on some issues that have bipartisan support, whether it's criminal justice reform or even international religious freedom. Over the past few years, we've seen a number of Republican bills introduced on international religious freedom, which were actually very inclusive and comprehensive. Most recently, we saw the introduction of a bill by Representative Joseph Pitts, who's a Republican out of Pennsylvania, which seeks to end blasphemy laws in countries that we're allied with, which maintain them. This language specifically included concerns about the plight of atheists within those countries. So it's reasonable to be upset, to be concerned, and it's important that people stay involved and participate in the democratic process. But I don't want everyone to think that we're going to lose on everything over the next few years. There still is potential for progress on a few issues that we're all concerned about. So in between fighting back against legislation that would jeopardize some of the most marginalized communities in America, we should also recognize that we have the opportunity to work with Republicans and Democrats on some common sense legislation that has bipartisan support and would do a lot of good in the world.
Matthew Bulger, the Legislative Director for the American Humanist Association, Michael Dora from CFI, and Amanda Knief of American Atheist. For your time and for your perspective, thank you so much. I'm going to make sure and include links to each of your organizations in the description box of this broadcast. I hope the holidays are great, and thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that concludes our broadcast on politics. Phew. Don't forget our patrons get an ad-free, completely commercial-free broadcast and one extra show a month starting in January. You can become a supporter at patreon.com/Seth Andrews. Next Tuesday, we lighten things up. It's Christmas music and some secular music by secular artists. So we'll crank up the tunes next week. Have a great one. I'll see you soon.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter. Watch dozens of original videos on the Thinking Atheist YouTube channel. And visit our website for resources, links, contact information, the editor's blog, and more. thethinkingatheist.com.